My name is Mary Jo Kane, and I'm the director of the Tucker Center. And on behalf of myself and the co-director, Professor Maureen Weiss, I want to welcome you all to tonight's event. Can you all hear me in the back? Okay. I also want you to know that there's going to be, well, let me say this. Before I begin my opening remarks, where I will set the stage for our distinguished lecture, I want to let you know that there'll be a reception right after the panelists' remarks and what I am sure will be a very thought-provoking question and answer session. And during the reception, our panelists will be available to answer more of the questions if you want to speak with them. Finally, I want to acknowledge the members of the Tucker team for all the hard work they have done behind the scenes: Austin Calhoun, Alyssa Norris, Jonathan Sweet. And a special thanks goes out to Associate Director Dr. Nicole Lavoie, who has overseen this entire event, and believe me, it has been no small task. So how about a round of applause for the Tucker team? Okay. Over the past 30 years, scholars have created an impressive body of knowledge regarding the numerous ways traditional sport media marginalize and sexualize female athletes. Into this vast and influential media landscape comes the recent and, quite frankly, amazing explosion of social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Not surprisingly, scholars have not to date kept pace with this important social and technological development. But nevertheless, we are beginning to ask some critical questions our panelists will explore in detail this evening. For example, will this technological paradigm shift challenge or simply reproduce how female athletes are portrayed in mainstream sport media? Will the unprecedented popularity of social media and the alternative ways of knowing it provides to traditional media fundamentally alter how we view athletic females and interact with women's sports? Our distinguished panelists, coming from diverse perspectives and backgrounds, will face off and take on these largely unexplored questions as we move into this age of new media. But before we do, and they do, and to place their discussion within the broader context of sport media scholarship, I want to briefly share what we know about how sportswomen are portrayed throughout mainstream media. With respect to amount of coverage, sportswomen receive only 6 to 8% of all coverage nationwide, even though they represent 40% of all participants. This gives the false impression that females just aren't that interested in participating in sports. With respect to type of coverage, we know that female athletes are more likely to be portrayed in ways that emphasize their femininity and their sexuality versus their athletic competence and dedication. Let me share with you 3 categories of coverage to illustrate my point. And these are categories that those of us who do scholarship in this area have found universally. First, portrayals of ambivalence, and I'll explain to you in a second what that means. Secondly, portrayals of sexualization. And then the third category is portrayals of athletic competence. Now, what do I mean by portrayals of ambivalence? This was a term that was coined by Duncan and Hasbrook at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And what they argued was there is a trend in terms of how female athletes are portrayed in the media where there is something in the image that lets you know, and by the way, these are from sport publications typically, there's something in the image to let you know that you're dealing with a female who's involved in sports, but that the primary focus of the image emphasizes, again, off-court femininity and sexuality and not athletic competence. So I'm going to give you 2 examples of what we as scholars would coin or code as an ambivalent portrayal. That's Michelle Wie from Sports Illustrated. And next is an ambivalent portrayal of Katie Smith. I think most of you who know who she is, one of the greatest basketball players this country has ever produced. Here's an ambivalent portrayal of Katie Smith. So that's a fairly typical and recent example of what is meant by portrayals of ambivalence. Now, next, I want to ask you to think about, to remember back how you felt when you see one of the most iconic images of women's sports that has ever been produced. Remember that moment and what that represented? Now, think about and feel when I share with you a second pattern that is represented throughout traditional media, and that is a term that I've called hypersexualization. So portrayals of sexualization, speaking of Brandi Chastain. These are all very recent images. Well, this one, the one I'm showing now isn't so recent, but here's a recent image of Danica Patrick. And then finally from ESPN, I don't like to use the phrase hot off the press, but it actually is, and it's gotten some media buzz. Serena Williams on the cover. And I could go on, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. The third pattern of portrayals, to get to a positive statement here, and that has to do with images of female athletes when they're portrayed, here's an idea, as athletes. So think about how, just react to this image of Serena Williams. Pretty different image. Or this kind of image. And finally, Candace Parker. Let me say a few words about Candace Parker in terms of her accomplishments as an athlete. She led the Tennessee Lady Vols to 2 national titles. She was both the Rookie of the Year and the MVP in the WNBA. But last spring, ESPN magazine profiled this superstar basketball player with the following description, and I quote, "Candace Parker is beautiful, breathtaking really, with flawless skin, endless legs and a C cup she is proud of but never flaunts. She is a woman who plays like a man, one of the boys. If the boys had C cups and flawless skin, a 6'4" stunner with the easy smile and perfect white teeth." So, what's really going on here is the whole issue of the notion of sex sells as a master narrative, and that those who cover and promote women's sports argue that the reason for the sexualization of female athletes like Candace Parker and Serena Williams is, whether we like it or not, the tried, but I suggest not the least bit true, argument that sex sells and that this approach is the best way to promote women's sports. The problem with this master narrative is that there are no empirical data to support it. Now, this is not to suggest that sex doesn't sell some things, but the key question for us as scholars to ask, and I'm hoping that we will also ask this in social media, is the following. When males buy ESPN magazine or the swimsuit issue of Sports Illustrated, are they consuming women's sports or female athletes' bodies as objects of sexual desire? My point here is that sex sells sex. And my other point is that it's entirely unclear to me how this image versus this one increases interest in and respect for women's sports. So this is where we are when it comes to traditional or mainstream sport media. Where are we when it comes to new media in general and social media in particular? We believe that the accomplished individuals we have invited here tonight will take an important first step in answering this most critical question. It is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Dr. Nicole Lavoie. Dr. Lavoie earned her MA and PhD from the School of Kinesiology at the University of Minnesota with an emphasis in sports psychology. She currently serves as the Associate Director of the Tucker Center. Before returning to the U of M in 2005, Dr. Lavoie was a research associate in the Center for Ethical Education at the University of Notre Dame. Her research interests, in particular increasing the number of female head coaches, stems from her experiences as a student athlete at Gustavus Adolphus and as the head tennis coach at Wellesley College. Recently, Dr. Lavoie has delved into the realm of social media by publishing her own blog and website and by helping to create the new Tucker Center blog. So please, a warm welcome in Dr. Nicole Lavoie. So I think this is generational, but before I turn the podium over to Nicole, as somebody who doesn't use social media at all, sorry, I just want to say to Nicole, so are you going to be tweeting throughout tonight's event, Nicole?
I might be.
And not the least bit creeped out by all those followers of your tweets?
No, not at all.
Okay. Well, let's turn it over to Nicole Lavoie. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's great to see you all tonight, and thank you for coming. And I also want to thank everybody who has joined us out there in the internet land who are logging onto our live stream. We're doing this for the very first time for a distinguished lecture, so I just want to give a shout out to those colleagues across the country and around the globe who are tuned in to us tonight. So it's my role right now to transition us from shifting gears from what we know about traditional media to what we know about social media. Now, I'm assuming that within our audience we have various levels of familiarity with social media, and some of you use it daily, and some of you might not use it at all. So whenever I give a talk, I kind of like to take a little barometer of the audience to see exactly who we're dealing with. So we're going to do this by a little activity. So I need everybody to stand up. Okay, so now if you're unable to stand, you can still participate by just raising your hand, okay? So I'm going to say a statement, and if this is true for you, you get to sit down. Okay, so if it's true for you, we're going to do a practice one. Now, since we studied gender in the Tucker Center, I think this is a good one to start with. So if you are a female or identify as female, if that's true for you, you can sit down. Okay, that's good. So now that we're all clear about our gender identity tonight, we can move along. So, all right, everybody back up. That was our first test. All right. Now we're going to do one more test, and then we're going to get to the real deal here. So I am not a current student at the University of Minnesota. If you are not a student at the U, you may sit down. Okay, now this is another way for me to take attendance, so thank you. All right, everybody back up. Now we're doing it for real here. Now I'm going to read a series of statements, and if this is true for you, you can sit down. Now, if you are not sure if it's true for you, or if you have no idea what I'm talking about, stay standing. All right, here we go. If you publish your own blog or publish your own website, or you've made a video and actually uploaded it to the web, you can sit. Okay. Remember, if you're not sure what I'm talking about or you have not done this, stay standing. Second, if you've posted a review of a product or you've commented on a blog or you've edited a wiki or something, you can sit down. Okay? If you've used an RSS feed or you've tagged a photo online, you may sit down. All right? That's good. Now, those of you who are standing up right now and feeling a little uncomfortable, that's okay. Don't. Now, if you've maintained a social networking site profile, Facebook, MySpace, LinkedIn, you can sit down. Now, you're on your honor, so don't just sit down because you're feeling weird, all right? All right, if you've read a blog, you've listened to a podcast, or if you watched a video on YouTube, you can sit down. Okay. Now, that leaves one left. Let's give him a hand. None of the above. All right, so what this helps, that's very helpful. So what this does is it puts us along Forrester's ladder, and this is from Groundswell, of different variations of usability on social media. So you can locate yourself on that ladder now that we've set the stage. So whether you're a creator or an inactive or somewhere in between, our common denominator tonight then is to collectively think about how social media impacts women's sport. So given the variability and familiarity of the usages of social media, we thought it would be good to show you a video, a 2-minute clip from Did You Know 4.0 that was made by X-Plane in collaboration with The Economist. And the video contains some facts and statistics that highlight the changing media landscape and the increasing importance of social media in our daily lives. It goes on, but we're just going to watch that little clip. All right, so what that video does then for us, it paints a really compelling picture of the power that social media has and that we're just beginning to tap into in terms of women's sports. So social media is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but many don't really fully understand exactly what it is, or the meaning is just commonly assumed. And based on our little stand-up activity, I think that may be true for this group as well. So what I want to do then is define exactly what social media are. So social media are highly accessible publishing techniques that use internet and web-based technologies. And social media are just that. They're social. They're a two-way conversation. These technologies are places where people create, collaborate, and share content such as text, pictures, and videos. Some social media sites are very popular, include ones you may be familiar with, even if you don't use them. They may include social networking sites like Facebook, LinkedIn, and MySpace. So if you were a joiner, you probably are familiar with these. It also includes blog sites and microblogs like Twitter. It includes pictures, music, and video like Flickr and YouTube, among others, and bookmarking sites like Delicious and Dig, and a variety of other things such as Yelp and Second Life and Wikipedia. So you may have heard then about a very popular social media tool called Twitter. It's a microblogging site that allows people in 140 characters in that top box to tell people, what are you doing? Here's a screenshot of the Tucker Center Twitter page that some of you might be familiar with. In essence, Twitter is a social media site in which users send public text messages to followers. Here's an example of a Tucker Center tweet in which we told our nearly 800 followers what we were doing on Friday, October 2nd. Today, we ask our followers via the Twittersphere, how many of them would be logged in and watching this via live stream? And we heard back from them, from people on staff at ESPN, from the Women Talk Sports Network, and the Women's Sport Foundation, and other colleagues around the country. So how many of you, just show of hands, have a Twitter account? Okay, good. So depending on your perspective then, or your place on Forrester's ladder that we did earlier, you may find Twitter very useful. You might find it confusing, or, as one member of the Tucker team recently said, it's kind of creepy. That person will remain anonymous. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just share with you a little bit of data. Twitter's being used a lot by athletes and sport organizations in a variety of ways. Coaches tweet their recruits, which that's probably starting to be regulated by the NCAA. Sport teams tweet play-by-play scores and updates, and teams and athletes use it to talk to fans. The usage of Twitter has increased exponentially, which you saw in the video. It grew 700% over the last year, and in February of 2009, it had 10 million visitors. It's a lot of traffic. One of the many great things about the Tucker Center is that we do attract some of the best and brightest grad students into our program that help keep our work really current and relevant. And last spring, 2 of our grad students, Austin Calhoun and Emily Houghton, began to track the usage of Twitter by sports organizations and athletes in order to provide a baseline and measure future impact. Now, I think Austin is somewhere live blogging and tweeting and watching it in the lobby. Is she in here? And Emily is down here in the front. And to put this kind of cutting-edge study in context, last week Austin asked me, when we were talking about this presentation, she said, do you think there was ever a time in which people were sitting around talking about how many NFL teams had a website? And I thought, that's a great question. So we're really at the nascent stage with social media research in terms of measuring its impact and the return on investment. So here are some stats that they found when they started this project last March, which I really think helps frame and get us thinking about the potential impact of social media. So the WNBA then, in March 2009, when they started tracking it, 38% of the teams did not have Twitter. By the time the season started in May, only 15% were not using Twitter. And in the playoffs in October 2009, all the teams had a Twitter presence. Now, on the next slide, you'll see Dr. Kane talked about Candace Parker, who's a very well-known female athlete, and they tracked her. So when she started tweeting in May, that was her first tweet. So she was on Twitter for 2 months, and she hadn't made a tweet until May, and she already had 900 followers. She hadn't done anything. And that growth went to 29,000 recently. Now, I just checked it today, and she's just a tick off 30,000. So what this puts into perspective for us is, if you think of the leading male athlete on Twitter, who might you think that would be? Okay, Tiger Woods is a good guess. Who else? Shaq, Lance Armstrong. Okay, well, to my knowledge, and I'll stand corrected, I believe Shaq has the most followers on Twitter. How many do you think he has? If the leading female athlete has 30,000, what does Shaq have? Somebody's looking it up right now on their phone. 2.4 million. 2.4 million. So when you see the numbers, it paints a picture that you can either be encouraged or disheartened or a little bit of both. So what do these and other trends mean for female athletes in women's sports? This is just one. This is the question at hand for our panelists tonight. So now that the stage is set, from traditional media to social media, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists sitting here in the front row. Each panelist will have 15 minutes to discuss their very diverse perspectives on social media, and then that will be followed by a Q&A. So I'd like to invite the panelists to come on up on the stage. and then I will give you their wonderful and distinguished backgrounds. There we go. So Dr. Marie Hardin, if you're Dr. Marie Hardin, please stand up. No. Oh, okay, there we go. All right, so Dr. Hardin is an associate professor of journalism and associate director of the John Curley Center for Sports Journalism at Penn State. We'll try not to hold it against her that Penn State just blanked the Gophers in football this weekend, but her research concentrates on diversity, ethics, and professional practices in sports media. Some of her recent research focuses on social attitudes and values of sports journalists and bloggers, and the experiences and career paths of women in sports journalism. Dr. Hardin will provide a research-based perspective on some of the potential impacts of social media on women's sport. Welcome, Dr. Hardin. Rachael Blount, who's sitting in the middle, in the center stage there, has been a sports reporter and columnist for the Star Tribune here in Minneapolis since 1990. You can read her column every Tuesday, which a lot of us do. Rachael has covered a wide range of sports, including the NHL, NBA, WNBA, college hockey, and the last 6 Olympic Games. As one of the few female sports columnists in the U.S., she has won a variety of national and state writing awards. As someone who cares very deeply about female athletes and has spent a career in the trenches reporting on them, Rachael will provide a perspective on social media from her experiences as a journalist in traditional media. So thank you, Rachael. And then sitting right next to me is Angela Ruggiero, our third panelist, is one of the most prominent women's hockey players in the world. She is a 3-time Olympic medalist and world champion. She's been training here in Blaine with the women's hockey national team, who are prepping for the upcoming Olympics in Vancouver in 2010. She just flew here today from an exhibition game over the weekend against rival Canada in Seattle. So she just arrived hot off the plane. Angela was the first female non-goalie to play professional men's hockey in North America. She's a record holder for the most games played for Team USA and a Hockey Hall of Fame inductee. She graduated cum laude from Harvard University with a degree in government and is currently pursuing her master's in sport management right here at the U. And so if you knew that, you saw her standing down here earlier. She uses multiple social media platforms to promote both herself and women's hockey, which she will discuss with us in more depth later. So let's give a warm Minnesota welcome to our panelists. All right, Dr. Hardin, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Nicole, and thanks to the Tucker Center, of which I've been a big fan for years, for putting together this important discussion about social media and its potential for empowering women's sports. First, I'll tell you that I come at the issue of social media and sports a little differently from my colleagues here tonight. I'm not a journalist who covers women's sports like Rachael, or an athlete who uses social media and can talk about the tremendous benefits of doing so from a first-person perspective like Angela. I'm a journalism professor who has looked at social media in the new media environment, especially the blogosphere. Tonight, I'm going to focus on the obstacles and potential in social media to providing alternatives to some of the images of women's sports you saw a little bit earlier and still see up here on the screen. I'm going to talk a little bit about one blog network in particular, that logo is also up there, where we see alternatives emerging. I'm also going to provide some words of caution and, just as appropriately, hope about what can happen in these venues. I want to take a step back, though, and provide you with results of some of our research in the Curley Center for Sports Journalism at Penn State on the sports blogosphere. First, some context. We've done a number of studies on media coverage of issues related to Title IX and women's sports in general. We've also talked to hundreds of sports journalists across the country about their attitudes toward women's sports and Title IX. Of course, we all know that sports coverage has reinforced myths about Title IX and put a low value on women's sports. Our surveys have found that this coverage mirrors the individual attitudes of media gatekeepers, who in depressingly high percentages believe that women's sports coverage is a loser. They also see Title IX as having hurt men's sports, a dangerous myth. We cannot expect progressive coverage from mainstream outlets dominated by these values and beliefs. It's not going to happen as long as the cultural environment stays status quo. Part of the problem, our research also indicates, is the lack of women working in sports media, because we know from our research that women cover Title IX differently than men. They also cover women's sports differently than men. But social media have emerged in recent years as an alternative to institutional media. Here, there are no gates, and the news hole is literally bottomless. Anyone then can become a reporter, an editor, a videographer, an anchor, a publisher, or even a media owner. Our logical question then becomes, is the sports blogosphere different from traditional or what we call legacy media? Might we see more progressive attitudes and values among independent entrepreneurial sports bloggers? In other words, can we, right now, expect a revolution or simply replication of what we already have? Our survey of more than 200 independent sports bloggers, and included many of the most read blogs on the web, found surprisingly little difference in the demographics, values, and attitudes between bloggers and institutional sports journalists. In fact, the lack of gender diversity among daily bloggers mirrors almost exactly what you find in sports departments, less than 10%. Because we know that gender makes a difference in the ways men and women talk and write about sports, this fact alone almost ensures generally homogeneous content that reinforces old media patterns. And a footnote here, even among the small number of women that we found, almost a third reported focusing solely on men's sports, not women's. When we asked bloggers about their beliefs and attitudes toward issues like Title IX, again, we saw patterns similar to those journalists working in institutional media. For instance, most bloggers told us they believe sports fans would never embrace or pursue women's sports to the degree they do men's sports. We also wanted to know if age makes a difference. Were younger bloggers in our survey more progressive? In a word, no. They express more sexist and heterosexist views than their older counterparts. The bottom line, right now, the blogosphere, for the most part, is not attracting individuals with attitudes and values that will change images of women's sports. Instead, it seems to be attracting more of the same. In fact, 4 of every 10 bloggers we surveyed told us they know the sports blogosphere is a sexist place. Not a single blog that focuses on women's sports is among the most trafficked blogs on the web. Instead, the list includes blogs with names such as, quote, Sharapova's thigh and Kissing Susie Kolber. The only comfort might be that even these overtly sexist blogs and their attendant Twitter feeds still don't have the reach and influence of institutional media, which is arguably less overtly sexist. And this is another footnote from my perspective. I want to remove any rose-colored glasses about entrepreneurial social media in general, sort of flattening, making the internet a more sort of democratic place. The sports media landscape, where ESPN is king and people turn to institutional sites for commentary, is going to become flatter. In other words, of course, there's a lot more opportunity for diverse voices to be heard, but it's not going to be flattened because of the emergence of social media. As one journalist astutely noted, legacy media is doing a lot less hand-wringing and a lot more co-opting of the best social media entrepreneurs these days. Bringing them under the umbrella by hiring them. In other words, the most consumed, the most popular bloggers and content producers in the new media environment likely will move to the payroll for sites like Yahoo Sports and ESPN. That fact and our research on entrepreneurial bloggers points to an important big picture takeaway. We must be vigilant in resisting the suggestion that the internet and social media platforms automatically level the playing field for women's sports. That notion, as far as I'm concerned, needs to be tossed in the same post-feminist bin as the idea sold by women's sport apparel manufacturers that achieving a certain fit look is somehow empowering for women as a collective. It's just not true. It is true that the space is unlimited, and in many ways, so are the opportunities. But the hierarchies are still intact in the new media world. They have not yet been ruptured. And Twitter, Facebook, blogging, and the social media forms that are still out there that we still haven't even gotten to yet are only the tools. So with this backdrop, what should we be thinking about? What are the possibilities, and what are the obstacles in front of us? I suggest we need two things to happen. We need more women in the conversation about sports. Social media, as we know, gives us an opportunity we've never had. In this context, there are no institutional gatekeepers in the way. And I've got some good news here, we are seeing women get into the conversation. A site with tremendous potential is the one with the logo I showed earlier, and that's Women Talk Sports, and some of you are probably familiar with that. Co-founder Megan Huter recently told me that the collective has about 60 contributors. Now, not all of those contributors are active, certainly, but it has big plans to continue growing. We believe what is happening there and in other pockets of new media is important and encouraging. I just want to share some numbers with you that Ann Gaffigan, who's also a co-founder of that collective, shared with me today. The site was launched in February of 2009, and again, it's sort of an aggregator for these blogs that focus on women's sports. In February of 2009, it had 550 unique visitors. Last month, it had 28,500 unique visitors. So we're certainly seeing some growth there that's really, really encouraging. In the big picture, though, the number of women who are talking about sports in these forums remains very small, and in many ways, the conversation remains insular. We have to ask why more women and men aren't joining the communities around women's sports. After all, these communities are just a click away. And that takes us back to the same questions that pioneers like Mary Jo Kane began exploring years ago. In some ways, the more things change, maybe the more they stay the same. Part of the challenge is our unchanged dual agendas. We've got to work within the parameters and definitions of sport in U.S. culture while simultaneously challenging its ideology. I'm convinced that the primary function of spectator sport in our culture is to reinforce gender roles and norms, and that function works against us. At the same time, sports are not perceived in mass culture as having that political function. They're seen as entertainment, right? We don't want to think too hard when we watch. We want to see images that match the scripts that have been drilled into us since our parents handed us a doll or a truck. People want media that relates to or reflects how they live their everyday lives within boundaries of invisible cultural norms. That's the appeal of the media that we all consume, if we think about it. In building fan communities with wide appeal, then, an overt message appealing to social change, pushing social change, in other words, quote, cover women's sports because you should, or consume women's sports because you should, is as difficult to sell as, I imagine, sunscreen in December here. Is that a tough sell here? We do need numbers, but we need numbers drawn because of the joy and pleasure and appeal of women's sports. So how do we draw more women to the public conversation about sports? I wish I had some specific things here that I could list for you. I will say this, it's going to take time. Social media encourages impatience, doesn't it? It's all about instant gratification. It's about speed and that instantaneous message, but we have to take the long view. The Tucker Center, Women's Sports Foundation, Women Talk Sports, and other networks are playing leadership roles in this. Female athletes at every level are also key. We also need passionate and, for much of it, unpaid labor willing to lobby for seats in the press box at, say, a high school girls' basketball game, and willing to write a line or two or post video or audio about the local high school girls' soccer games. And what I just described, put against the backdrop of the everyday lives of many women, shows how hard this task will be. As I said earlier, there were two things I think we need to do. The second, beyond numbers, is to develop empowering common agendas. As we know, more voices in the choir doesn't guarantee the song we hear is music to our ears. We know there are issues involving marketing and coverage of female athletes on which many advocates and athletes don't agree. As a small example, look at the discourse on Women Talk Sports about the image of Serena Williams that you saw earlier. First, let me say that this discourse is markedly different overall from the dozens and dozens of posts in the general sports blogosphere. Again, most of those sites are written by and targeted to men, but I'm not going to talk about that now. Within Women's Talk Sports, though, when we look at that, the discourse there, the discourse fell on a continuum from what we might call truly sort of second wave views on that Serena Williams image to what I would call post-feminist. While several bloggers critiqued the image as presenting Williams in a, quote, sexualized, passive, swimsuit edition type of way, likely a response many of us would agree with, other women praised Williams for displaying a, quote, athletically built, yet feminine body. The range of discourse could be seen as healthy. It could also be viewed as strong evidence that even women, among women, were not all on the same page. So at the end of the day, it's not only about bringing more women to the conversation. We must keep working on consensus on these issues, keeping in mind nuances involving things like race, sexuality, the neoliberalist marketplace. Scholars, educators, female athletes, and journalists all have to be in the conversation. Again, the work of the Tucker Center, including its seminal research on what fans think about sexualized images of female athletes, can and should powerfully influence that dialogue. As I mentioned earlier, social media is delivering now, for the most part, more of the same. Did I also mention more work for women's sports advocates? Social media offers great promise. As we work over time to make social media work for us and everyone, we can build communities and then consensus. In the end, this is really important. It's not the platforms. It's the voices and the values that matter. Thanks.
Now we're done with the PowerPoint, so I'm just going to put that off. And
Do you want me at the podium now?
you, whatever you're comfortable with.
Being from traditional media, of course, I have no PowerPoint, no video, no bells and whistles, so I apologize for that. Please bear with me, and we're doing this the old-fashioned way. We're just speaking words that have been written on paper, so. First of all, I'd like to say I think it's great that the Tucker Center is discussing this topic now while social media is still very young. As we all know, with the internet, it's a very powerful medium that ballooned very quickly, and by the time people began studying it to think about what effects it was having on our society, it was already so far down the road that we probably missed some opportunities to maybe shape what it was doing. So great that we're talking about this now when we still have a chance really to get a good hold on social media and figure out how to make it work for women's sports in a healthy way. Those of us in the traditional media, in newspapers, magazines, television, and radio, have some mixed feelings about social media, as you might guess. We are using it ourselves both as a new channel of communications to augment what we do in print and on the airwaves, and also as a reporting tool. A lot of reporters have their own blogs, and we can use those to give readers additional content that doesn't fit into the newspaper. And again, reporters for television and radio stations often do the same thing. And we also use athletes' websites and blogs and Twitter feeds and Facebook pages to do some research on those athletes when we want to write stories about them, or sometimes even to break news. Some of you might be aware that Kevin Love from the Timberwolves actually broke the news about Kevin McHale not returning as coach when he tweeted very late at night. I think he was coming home from a nightclub, and he sent out a tweet saying, "It's too bad that Coach McHale won't be back with us. That was the first anyone said. The team was not happy about this. They were trumped on their own story. They lost control of how they wanted to release it. But that was how it first got out. And reporters who follow Twitter feeds and check out Facebook pages to know what's going on with athletes were then alerted to that through the Twitter feed. We've also found, as many of you probably realize, some incriminating photos, damning statements that people have put on blogs or Facebook pages, again, creating news through these things that traditional media is then able to pick up on. And sometimes we just use those sites to get some background on an athlete before an interview, to try to find out what's important to them, what they think about, find ways that we might plumb what they know ourselves for our own stories. Traditional athletes also providing a platform for athletes to blog. The Star Tribune has a section called Your Voices, where we have a lot of members of our community who blog through our own website, and Angela's teammate, Natalie Darwitz, is one of the people who blogs for us about her experience as a hockey player and also just what she thinks about current events or things that are happening. It's my impression that as Marie said, that social media is certainly a mixed bag right now in terms of what it's doing for how female athletes are perceived. In looking particularly at the sites that female athletes are using themselves to get their own message out in an unfiltered manner, their Twitter feeds, their Facebook pages, and that sort of thing, in the best case scenario, they are retaining control of these things. They're using them constructively to present healthy images. A lot of athletes are doing this, but a lot are also giving up that control to an agent, to a PR representative, to someone who may have an agenda that is separate from showing a healthy image of a female athlete. And in many cases, that is just perpetuating the stereotypes, as we talked about. An agent might think the best way to sell their client is to put up a sexy photo, a cheesecake photo. Maybe that gets more endorsements, they think, or maybe that'll get a TV appearance or get people talking. You know, that's the way agents think, and a lot of times women give control over to them, and they're the ones that are actually posting. In fact, some women on their Twitter feeds, they don't even write them. Other athletes do this too, male athletes do it as well, but a lot of times they have a Twitter feed or a Facebook page, and the athlete herself is not providing the content. Someone else is doing it, and that someone else typically has an agenda that may not be in line with changing any images. If you look at Danica Patrick's Facebook page, for instance, you will find the cheesecake photos, the bikini photos, magazine covers, videos, and such of her in these kind of situations. And then you look at the comments that are being left on this page, and they're from men saying things like, "You are hot," or "I want to have sex with you." And of course they are, because these are the images that are put out there. So it's not going to be, "I want to see you race," or "I hope you win." It's, you know, they're reacting to these other types of images that are being presented. And a lot of times, too, particularly when women give up control, the Facebook pages and the Twitter feeds are being used to sell a product or to plug something or to mention an upcoming television appearance, get something in for a sponsor. So it's not really about the athlete themselves. They can be the best possible tool for an athlete to communicate directly to their fans. And it's very appealing to athletes, I know, because you have the chance to speak directly to people without going through the filter of the traditional media. But it's valuable, I think, only if the athletes do maintain that strict kind of control and don't let someone else set the agenda for them. If they allow a handler to create the image, then they lose the authenticity that makes this direct communication valuable. And even with the female athletes that are using this in a positive way, as Marie said, the internet is still a very sexist place. There's a website called twitterathletes.com that's an aggregator website. It pulls together the Twitter feeds of more than 1,000 pro athletes. And included in their definition of professional athlete are 2 members of the Lingerie Football League. I never knew this existed until I saw this posted on twitterathletes.com. There are 2, a quarterback, and I don't know what the other person did, but And one of these athletes, a woman named Crystal Gray, has 2,610 followers, and that is double what the world champion skier Lindsey Vonn has, and more than any of the pro soccer players listed on that site, more than most of the LPGA players listed on that site. So while social media can provide a great platform for women to get the message out, it's a platform for the same old messages as well. And a lot of times, given the traffic, that it drowns out the positive messages that are there. And in terms of bloggers writing about women's sports, for every site that presents a positive image of women's athletes or speaks about women's sports in a serious manner, there are others that just continue to marginalize and to stereotype. There are still frat boys out there creating websites about women's sports that are not really about women's sports. They're posting pictures and asking people to vote on who the hottest athlete is. And I think with the fragmentation of media that we've seen over the years, where you've got cable television channels that cater to a very specific demographic, you've got websites that cater to a very specific demographic, people are tending to choose to consume the media that already reinforces what they believe. They're not choosing to expose themselves to new viewpoints, to seek out something fresh or to open their minds. People who lean more to the right will watch Fox News because it reinforces what they already believe. People that lean to the left may read Huffington Post for the same reason. And so I think what happens is your general sports consumers aren't finding these web pages that are devoted to serious discussion of women's sports, or an athlete's web page that is promoting a really healthy image. Instead, they're just going to these websites that already play into what they believe. And then when you look at the sites that have a wide reach, the ESPN.coms and such, they are still reinforcing the same stereotypes as well. Women's sports are very far down the ladder there. You're not seeing a lot of good images there, and so no progress is really being made there. Traditional media is at a crossroads right now, and I'm personally concerned that this will result in even less coverage of women's sports in traditional media. What is happening is, because the internet caused traditional media to abandon their old business model, we didn't figure out quickly enough how to adapt, how to use the internet, and how to make money to that to replace the revenue streams that were being lost to things like Craigslist. We continue to shrink. We continue to lose subscribers and viewers and advertisers. And we have fewer readers out there, fewer eyes are on us. And as this happens, our publications cut jobs, we have fewer reporters, and we have less space. It happens also with radio and television. We're seeing the same kinds of things happening. So when you have less space, the reaction of a lot of sports editors is to say, well, we just don't have room for women's sports. And then they look at our website and see what gets the most hits, which is dictating a lot of things right now. And if the Viking stories get the most hits day after day, they think, well, if we've got 6 Viking stories, 7 will be better, which means you have even less space. So I think that's a problem. It's very troubling to me, but I think that's the slope that we're headed on with the traditional media. But I do still think there is an important place for traditional media in this evolving landscape. When you look at athletes' web pages and blogs, a lot of times they have links to newspaper stories or magazine stories or video that was produced by a television station. So there's still value there. And I still think as well that professional reporting, particularly people that are really committed to telling the broad stories of their community, it's still very important. Citizen journalism is all well and good, and blogging is all well and good, but there still is a place for the traditional media that is a trained journalist that can go in and ask the tough questions, put things into a context, look at issues that may not be looked at otherwise. I think that's still going to be very important. Twitter feeds are only 140 characters, and a lot of times that's just enough space for with my apologies, enough space for athletes to show they can be as inane as anybody else. So you still have space for traditional media, I think, to tell stories in a larger way, and again, in a way that's more grounded in social context too. So, and even though we're shrinking, there are still a lot of journalists that are committed to this important role, that do see women's sports as important and do understand the power that these images have in our society. It's my hope that we can continue to develop more professional reporters to tell those stories while more athletes tell their own. Thanks very much.
Hold on 1 second, I gotta send a tweet. See, on the stage at the Tucker Center lecture. Hope you're watching. Send. All right, got that up. My flip camera. You guys seen these? All the college kids know these. Okay, just to wake you guys up, I'm doing a blog, podcast for Quest, who's our team sponsor. And so I'd like you guys to be part of this week's blog, showing one of the many ways that I use social media. I'm going to ask you guys to say, welcome Team USA to Minnesota, good luck in Vancouver. Can you guys remember that? Okay. Now you only get one chance. You got to do it loud. Don't be embarrassed by the person next to you. Nice and loud, okay? Hold on 1 second. This is how I use traditional or social media. All right, we're here in the Tucker Center at the Distinguished Lecture Series. I'm really psyched to be on the panel with these amazing women up here. Eh? We're talking about women's sport and social media, and the audience has a message for all the women's hockey players on Team USA.
Welcome, Team USA, to Minnesota, and good luck in Vancouver.
All right, so you guys can check out my podcast you're going to be on. Well, as you know, I'm on the women's Olympic ice hockey team. I feel fortunate. I've been able to play in 3 Olympics. I was the youngest member of the team in '98. We won a gold medal in Nagano, Japan. And then we got a silver in Salt Lake City, and then a bronze in '06. And we're fighting hard here in Minnesota, getting ready to win the gold back in Vancouver. So I've had a really interesting opportunity to be a part of many Olympic hockey teams, and at the same time see the growth of from traditional media to social media. My first exposure, I guess, was I was 18 in '98, and they said, you have to sign up for a Yahoo account. And I was like, what? And they said, you know, we'll get you an email address. So they got every Olympian in the village an email account. And fans could just send you a, hey, good luck in Nagano, you know, way to represent Team USA. So I basically had a log of all these amazing emails from fans. In '02, I started blogging. I had a few websites that asked me to do some blogging. So, you know, I got my hands wet doing that. And then in '06, I actually did a little podcasting for NBC Olympics, and they would broadcast those on their internet. And now in '10, it's my career, I guess, as a athlete has progressed, as has social media. Today, I not only have, I do podcasts with our team sponsor, Quest. They basically upload those once a week. I'm doing those with one of my teammates. And it gives sort of a behind-the-scenes look at what it's like to be an athlete. I have a Twitter account. I just started that only a few months ago. And for me, that's one of the best ways just to connect directly with fans, because I update it once or twice a day. I can upload pictures and, again, link traditional media articles to my Twitter account, and people can see what's going on in my life. So I blog. I just started a YouTube channel, as some of you hopefully have seen. I have a website, AngelaRuggiero.com, And that has been one of the best ways for me to interact, again, with my fans, all these different ways. I can promote my hockey camps. I have girls' hockey camps in the summer. I can promote myself. I can promote my team. I can promote my sport. I mean, for me, the benefits of social media are huge. So from an athlete's perspective, it really puts everything in your own hands. Not to say that we write as eloquently as the traditional media sources, but again, you're able to connect directly with the people and the fans that want to follow you. So I guess that's my first point, is just access. For those of you that don't know, I was on The Apprentice a few years ago. I actually went on in season 6, and I got to have the opportunity to be a reality star. It's funny because I think that being an Olympic athlete is actually the first form of a reality show that anyone had access to. You get to hear behind the scenes what it's like to be an athlete, and then you get to watch them compete. And so as a real reality show, Donald Trump style, I guess I got used to people kind of wanting to find out more about you and seeing behind the scenes, and I think that translated into, it translates now as an athlete across the board. We're kind of, I think, used to that all access. You're used to the, in the locker room, someone's got a mic, or we just had a game out in Washington. We had someone on the bench interviewing us during our TV timeout. You're used to blogging. You're used to having sort of this presence, which you understand is going to promote you and promote your sport. So it's, as an athlete, it's actually, I think, is a good thing because you're able to, again, connect with your fan base. I was talking with Dr. Kane earlier, and she's saying, well, you're getting, is it really invasive sometimes? I said, well, yeah, it can be, but again, you can decide what you blog about. You can decide what you talk about, and therefore you can control your own image. You don't have to talk about something that's controversial. You can stick to, things that you think are appropriate for whatever means you're connecting to your fans. So access, that's my big, one of my big points tonight. We've talked about, I think they said 6 to 8% of traditional media, it covers women's sports. So I'm a women's sport, women's ice hockey, and I'm actually a non-traditional sport. So unlike gymnastics or basketball or golf or some of the sports, tennis, that actually get a lot of the women's coverage, of that 6 to 8%, we get this little sliver at the bottom, and usually it's only every 4 years. So to be an athlete and to be able to take that into your own hands and say, all right, well, if traditional media isn't covering us, and to be honest, a lot of the times I'll have reporters ask me, you have all your teeth. Wow, that's great. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. And you guys, you're from Minnesota, so you guys know hockey, but I grew up in California. There wasn't a lot of hockey out there. Traditionally, you get these questions from reporters. They've never covered women's hockey before. They just sort of have to they get their one article in there, and we're happy to have it, but they don't really understand the sport, nor do they cover it. So for a non-traditional women's sport, it's especially important to have access to your fans, to be able to go in and say, hey, I'm on the road and I'm doing this, or this was the score of our game, or I like to listen to this kind of music. Again, to connect to the fans that are out there, because I guess the way I liken it is traditional media will once in a while throw a women's hockey article out there. Okay, so if you want to follow my team, you're going to go home and say, oh, open up the paper tomorrow, and oh, you're going to be lucky if there's a story on women's hockey. But you could go onto my Twitter site. You could go on my blog. You can watch my podcast. You can go onto our Team USA Facebook fan page. There are a lot of these social media non-traditional sites now popping up. You could follow my team and actually start to really know us as people, as well as to watch us and understand our sport. So I guess, in a sense, we're taking it into our own hands, directly connecting to the fans that want to follow us. And I'll tell you another thing. Traditional media, like Rachel alluded to before, spoke about, they're going to cover the Vikings because that's what everyone wants to hear about. You know, Brett Favre, you can't get away from him these days. I've become a Brett Favre fanatic now because I hear so much. I turn on the TV and there he is. So what's happening is, again, like you said before, there's less room for us. There's less room for women's sports and especially non-traditional women's sports. So again, this is a way for us to access the fans that are diehard women's hockey fans, and there's a lot of them out there. So what I've been able to do, I do girls' hockey schools every summer, all over the country, and these young girls will follow me and talk to me on Facebook or Twitter, and it's those fans that traditional media isn't going after, and they may lose them. They have somewhere to go now, and that's what athletes have the ability to do. We have the ability now to go into your room on your computer, and you could, hey, Ange, what's happening? Like, what's your favorite hockey stick? And I can tell you what my favorite hockey stick is. It's also a great way for us to, as an athlete, to promote the things that you're doing. If that's promote your sponsors, if that's promoting any charity work that you do, if that's promoting your sport itself, just helping people understand your sport. You know, again, it's a great way to build your brand, a great way for, as an athlete, to help the common person understand what it's like to be, in my case, an Olympic athlete, or any female athlete for that matter. It's the same thing as the guys. I mean, we do the same stuff. Now it's another way for those fans to understand that. It can be a source of income. I know some people blog, they get paid. Some female athletes. I actually interviewed, I'm going to try to post it to my YouTube channel, Michelle Kwan, Sean Johnson, Lindsay Hawkins, she's a skateboarder, Jess Mendoza, softball player, Greta Eliason, skier, a bunch of female athletes last week, and asked them, what do you guys think of social media? And across the board, they love it. It's our way as female athletes to touch our fans, to let them know what we're all about, and as a result, have them follow us and have that help our sports out. One thing I would say is you get some sort of media training over the course of my years, how to, stand in front of a podium, not fidget, not say and when someone's interviewing after the game, kind of how to get everything in 30 seconds. There is no social media training yet, so that can get some athletes into trouble if they're not careful, if there's no filter, so to speak. So I think that's one thing that as social media starts to grow and athletes start to use it, hopefully there'll be some social media training out there. I had a fan once, I Twittered I was going to a coffee shop in LA, and I had someone show up. And I was like, whoa, it's kind of weird. So, I guess I learned after the fact, I was just at a coffee shop as opposed to I am going. So there are a couple stalkers out there. That's okay. Helping the sport, But I guess in conclusion, I think that as an athlete, again, I'm all about promoting female sports. I'm on the board at the Women's Sports Foundation. I've been, I love what the Tucker Center is doing. I think that it's important for female athletes to do what you can to promote your sport. And that's not to, say anything wrong about guys' sports. I love watching men's sports, but it's, the access, again, isn't out there for women, and so social media is the best way for us to get our brand out there, to tap into the non-traditional, not the men 18 to 36, because they're going to be watching football or basketball or baseball. It's those young girls out there that you have the opportunity to inspire, or those families out there that want to come to, that's our base, that's who watches women's hockey games. When I was 18, just one last story, I came back from the Olympics. And I just coincidentally, someone from the school right across from I went to Choate in Connecticut, and a little elementary school came up to me and said, would you speak at our school? So of course I said, okay, that'd be great. I brought my medal, and I spoke to the girls there and the boys, and I told them my story, and I connected with one of these kids. Well, it turns out her name is Caitlin Cahow, and she's on the Olympic team now. And it's just so funny because it was just by chance that I lived right next to this school, and there was an aspiring young hockey player that had potential that I got to meet and talk to and say, you can do whatever you put your mind to, and show her my gold medal and give her something to shoot for. That's by chance. Now I have the access to do that to a huge platform of young girls, my own words, not traditional media, but those are the girls that are on my Twitter account and my Facebook page and going on to YouTube. Those are the young girls that are captivated already. So for me, that's a great benefit, and one of the reasons that I'll obviously continue to do my podcasts and my Twitter updates and everything else to reach those young girls especially, but also the everyday fan that hopefully will love what they are reading and want to hear more about the women's hockey team, and then knock on Rachel's door and say, hey, can you write another article on the women's hockey team? That's how I think the gap is going to be bridged. We're going to get those avid fans to continue to grow, give them as much content as possible as an athlete, and then traditional media will say, all right, there is a base out there. Maybe we'll have to write a few more articles, and Brett Favre can take a back seat for now. Thank you.
Wow, that was great, you guys. Thank you. Let's give them another hand. Well, we have now people positioned up top to do a Q&A. This is always a lively part of the Tucker Center Distinguished Lecture. So I just want to caution or advise people. We usually have quite a few questions, so keep your question brief and direct it to someone. And Austin is in the back. I can see the glow of her iPhone. She's going to be pulling a few questions off of our Twitter feed as well from the people that are watching who are not in this room. So we're going to be a little interactive tonight. So let's take 2 questions live in the room, and then Austin, I'm going to go to you for the third. So if you have a question, just stand up or raise your hand and get us started. Yeah. And then just briefly tell us who you are to put a little context to your comment.
Hi, my name is Fiona Quick, writer for Minnesota Hockey Journal, as well as a sports media or social media analyst during the day. Angela, this is for you. How do you monitor your own social media content as far as what's being said about you besides what you provide?
Well, I guess I do my own tweets and try to control the content as much as I can. I mean, I have had some instances where I'll have a lot of fans mad at me for a comment I made on TV or something that I said. In one case, I spoke out in the last Olympics actually about running up the score. I didn't think it was appropriate, and I had hundreds of emails the next day. So I guess I try to moderate. My agent helps if something drastic were to ever happen, like a picture or something crazy that athletes we all have to be aware of. I'd have the help of her and USA Hockey, which is also we have some training from our personnel there, but. Yeah, I guess I just try to moderate, and if there's derogatory comments, usually I'll just delete them, not keep them up on my fan page, or not respond to them. Don't give them the time of day. Does that help?
Okay, good. Down here in the front.
Hello, my name is Seda Reed. I'm a former sports writer and sports editor. Now I'm a graduate student interested in studying the effects of sports media, particularly women's sports. And I have a question for Marie. I was wondering, are there particular aspects of sports media, the effects on women and men, but based on women's sports that really haven't been touched on yet that you think there's a need for?
In terms of research?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we need to do a lot more research on fans and a lot more research on how fans see women's sports. I also think we need to get more research on how fans situate what they learn about gender from sports coverage. I mean, and the reason we don't see a lot of that coverage is a lot of that kind of research is just tougher to do. It's not quite as easy as some of the research where you're calling journalists and doing content analyses and that kind of thing. We need to hear in more systematic ways from fans.
Austin, are you ready up there? Sure. All right.
So this tweet is from Megan at Women Talk Sports, and she's coming at it from a little bit of a different angle than what we've heard tonight and this, I guess, can be for anyone. She didn't necessarily direct it, but what is the potential, or do you think female athletes using social media can lead to an increase in ticket sales or revenue?
Does anyone want to tackle that one?
I'll comment.
Go.
No one is. I would say definitely, again, back to my point, since traditional media doesn't let your fan follow you on a day-to-day basis, you lose a lot of fans, and social media allows you to target that audience or tap into that target audience, promote your sport, list when you're playing, list all the times, all the pertinent information that they can't get when they open a newspaper. If done properly, social media will allow those fans all access to everything you're doing. I mean, what you're eating in the morning to how you're preparing for a game to, again, when you're playing and how much tickets cost.
I'll add something. I do think that it has the potential to turn casual fans into really passionate fans who then are willing to put out the dollars to go to the games, to get the season tickets, that sort of thing.
Right here, Alyssa. There's Matt.
Hi, my name is Matt Baum. I'm a doctoral student in sports sociology here. Question, maybe Rachel can answer this. Marie, you talked about ESPN, those sites, things like that, or those traditional media not flattening at all. And Rachel, you talked about using blogs, things like that, using social media with the Star Tribune. My question is, what's the responsibility of the Star Tribune or ESPN.com for the comments that come through there?
I can speak for the Star Tribune. And are we talking about the comments that are attached to?
So it's a two-way communication.
Yes.
Say the communication that comes back from the fans, because ultimately
Correct.
They end up degrading and.
They do. And actually, we have just begun at the Star Tribune, we've begun increased moderation of those comments. For quite a long time, we had only one part-time person that was doing that, and it got completely out of hand. That's absolutely right. And unfortunately, then you have, you know how our society is, there's so much hostility and so much anger, and you have people that don't like women's sports that would then get on a story about women's sports and make a nasty comment. So we now have increased moderation of those to try to keep the commentary more civilized. And I do think that's really important, not just for sports stories, but for all stories. Again, it's a matter of getting control over the internet and not allowing it to just run amok, but to make sure that the conversation is a healthy conversation.
Mary Beth?
Hi, my name's Mary Beth Berry. I teach at one of the local high schools. And one of the comments, Angela, that I heard you talk about these fans as almost being part of your personal life. Where is the balance between knowing you as an athlete and appreciating what you do as an athlete as compared to what you eat for breakfast. Oh, she eats Cheerios, I'm going to go watch her play. And the reason I ask that question is because I deal with students, and I have to take their cell phones away when I see them in the school day, and they spend so much time on their cell phones. Where's the balance?
Great question. I think, it's as much as you want to share. A lot of my teammates, most of my teammates don't have a Twitter account. They don't do anything. They're there to play hockey, and that's it. And that's okay, because that's their decision. And then there are other athletes on my team that are all about getting into the community and doing, talking to the fans after the games and meet and greets and signing autographs. So it is what you want to make of it. A lot of times I look into the stands. I know I'm supposed to be focused, but I'll look into the stands and what's going on, who's here, and I'll see these young girls that come to the games again, and they're not watching the game. They're eating popcorn and running around and talking to their friends, and they're talking. But then they'll see, hey, good goal, and so they're not really consuming our sport, to be perfectly honest. They're consuming you as a role model and as an athlete, and saying, one day I want to be like them, even though maybe they can't comprehend the sport just yet. It's to have that place for them. So, you don't have to, I don't have to tell them what I'm eating but I choose to do that because I feel I'm in a very unique position that I have a larger following, so I can connect better with that generation that grew up when there's a million reality shows out there they want all access to, as opposed to the traditional where, hey, if you don't feel like tweeting, no big deal, that's okay.
I've got a question for you guys. Let's just look into the future. Where do you see this going? What 10 years from now, 5 years from now, what is social media and its impact on women's sport? What does it look like?
I can't imagine how large it will be 10 years from now. It's grown so quickly. As your video clips show, just in 6 years, look how many followers they have now on Twitter and how many people look at YouTube every day and Facebook. I can't imagine how large that will be. And then how many new things. What are the technologies that we haven't even thought about now that will be in play 10 years from now? So I think it's just going to be a continual evolution, and the best way to try to make this a positive thing for women's sports is to be on top of it, to always be looking at that next thing, and don't let it become the next big thing without you being right there with it, figuring out how to use it to your advantage.
Right?
Yeah, I think now and into the next 5 years or so, it's a great time for women's sports fans. So if you're already a women's sports fan, what a great opportunity it is, right, to follow Angela or other athletes via blogs, Facebook, Twitter, that sort of thing. What I hope also happens is that we need a cultural shift. These technologies are great, but in terms of really empowering women's sports in the big picture, we need to continue to have a cultural shift in the way we see gender in sport.
I guess real quick, I'm hoping traditional media will see the power of girls' sports and women's sports through social media. So build the base that way, and then eventually they'll jump on.
Good.
My question feeds into that, actually.
Read your mind.
Round 2, Fiona.
Dr. Hardin, you talked about the lack of female bloggers blogging about women's sports. I actually don't write that much about women's sports myself, and I would like to know what your thoughts are in getting more women to write about women's sports. Obviously, they're not growing up to write about women's sports. I've been doing it for such a long time. There weren't very many women's sports when I started writing. I've been trying to pick it up a great deal myself more. But how do you get more women to start writing about women's sports? That's for Rachel as well, and Angela.
Do we have another hour for that answer? Can you go ahead.
I'll just make a quick comment. I think athletes are key. I think young athletes and women who are involved at the local level in community sports can be really key to developing the numbers, that critical mass that we really need to see. But it's going to have to be a work of a labor of love, right? A labor of passion, because it's not going to be paid for the most part. But that's where we've got to. I think that's a good place to start.
And I think when you're talking about traditional media as well, a lot of women's sports journalists, and let's face it, our numbers are not very great to begin with, but a lot of us, when we first got into this business, it's just ingrained in you that the way to move up the ladder, the way to become a columnist, the way to become a big-time writer is to cover a men's sport, because those are the sports that get attention, right? Those are the sports that people want to read about. Those are the sports that always have the spotlight. And so I think a lot of us start out that way, but then as your career evolves, you meet people like Angela, you meet people like her teammates, and you learn what fantastic athletes and people and role models they are, and they appeal to you as a human being as well as a journalist. You learn very quickly that a lot of people that play for the Vikings and the Twins are not very good interview subjects, and indeed may not be people you would ever want to hang out with. But you do learn once you spend more time around women athletes and you hear these stories, and then also I think with maturity, as you start to realize the power that the traditional media has to get those stories out there and to let people know how important this is to our society to present these sort of healthy role models and to create a new image for women's sports. It becomes, certainly in my life, it's become a motivating factor for me. I love writing about these guys, and I love the fact that maybe this will help change attitudes in our society, and I'm very proud to do that.
Good, we'll just take,
Yeah.
good. I saw one last hand in the back row, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, Angela, I was curious about, I mean, you are distributing information on all these different, channels with Facebook and Twitter and podcasts and everything. Do you have some kind of strategy or some kind of very conscious content that you put out on each of these streams, or is it pretty much, an echo chamber? I mean, are you doing the same kind of thing on each
No,
one?
I mean, our podcast that I do, that's all access. Quest is our big sponsor, so they're like, go in and do whatever you want. And they're like, here's a flip camera. I'm like, all right. So honestly, it's behind the scenes stuff on my team. My Twitter account is more what I'm doing personally. I'm here, this was the score of our game, this is how I'm training today, sort of whatever I feel like at the time, tweeting about. And my website is more to promote the things that I'm doing, such as my hockey schools, and any articles that come up, I'll link them on the front page, or so that's the more sort of informational page there. So I guess they're kind of 3 or 4 different, and then the YouTube, whatever, hopefully people post things up there. We just started that, but yeah, they're all different, I guess, but at the same time trying to encompass as much information as possible.
Do you have any sense of any kind of duplication of the audience? I mean, are people that are on your Twitter feed also Facebook friends also?
Yeah, I link them all. I mean, on my website, you can follow Angela on Facebook, and you could go link and be my friend. Hopefully everyone friends me after this. So yeah, we try to strategically link them, and then USA Hockey does the same thing. There's a Facebook fan page for our team, and you want to try to use them all together. So if one site is just covering, obviously, the behind the scenes, the next could be the more formal, watch the Distinguished Lecture Series tonight. So yeah, they're all linked, and they all work together, I think, very well.
Good. Well, I'd like to wrap us up tonight by saying thank you again, and thank you all for attending, and thank those who are watching out there on the web. And we really hope this is the beginning of the conversation. There are a lot of people kind of talking about this in places, but we wanted to use tonight as a starting point for taking control and taking control of the content. So thank you. If you want to share your thoughts about the lecture, if you didn't have a chance to ask a question, please visit our blog or post a comment on Angela's website. Or if you're really feeling like you have something to say, in the lobby, you can find Austin, and she has a flip cam, and you can tell her and we're going to put a little video together. So we'll be capturing some reactions if you really have a compelling something to say. So let's give our panelists another round of applause. A very informative discussion. Thank you very much. So please join us in the lobby for some refreshments.